So we regret the delay, and can I request all of you to please maybe fill in the seats here in the center, if that's be fine. So in 5 minutes we should be starting. Thank you. Fill these seats in the center, if that'll be. If we can request people from there to please come in and. Thank you. A very good morning to all of you present here, and we welcome you to the International Conference on Jobs for Development, Challenges and Solutions, organized jointly by the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations and the World Bank. Given the centrality of job creation and skill development for economic and social development, ICRIER, along with the World Bank headquarters and selected research institutions in Asia, Africa, Europe, and Latin America, is participating in a global initiative called the Jobs and Development, creating multidisciplinary solutions. This initiative aims to build a vibrant and engaging community of experts on jobs, and it seeks to build consensus among policymakers, academics, private sector, labor unions, development practitioners, and others on the need to tackle the jobs challenge from a multi-sectoral and a multidisciplinary perspective. We are doing a series of research papers, blogs, Google Handouts, and events covering a wide range of issues related to job creation and skill development in this country under this initiative. So this conference today is part of the engagement organized under the initiative. The conference is spread across 2 days, where distinguished speakers and area experts will be deliberating on topics ranging from youth unemployment to skill and job creations and to issues related to labor welfare, among others. I thank you all for coming here and the distinguished speakers and participants who travel from a long distance to be part of this conference. I now invite Dr. Rajat Kathuria, Director and Chief Executive, ICRIER, to please give his welcome remarks. Dr. Kathuria.
Thank you, Shweta. And thank you all for coming here. And apologies for the slight delay. The Labour Secretary will be joining us at 11:30, but we thought we would start even before that. Dr. Ahluwalia, Dr. Rama, Manish Sabarwal, a very warm welcome to all of you on the dais and in the audience. Thank you so much for coming. Shweta has made my job easier by giving you a description of this project, but let me nonetheless tell you a little more about not only this work that we are doing, but how it complements some of the other work that we are doing in ICRIER relating to jobs and manufacturing. As Shweta said, the agenda for this workshop includes youth unemployment, an issue which is affecting not only us, but a number of European countries, green jobs and skills, migration, job discrimination, social protection, and labor welfare. I feel that ICRIER's research in this area is timely for several reasons. We will become the most populous country on the planet, of 1.3 billion by 2030. Given India's urgent need to create productive employment, I'm really happy that we have launched this major initiative on jobs. As Shweta said, this is a part of a multidisciplinary, multi-institutional setup which allows for engaging a community of experts to create consensus, and all stakeholders, including labor unions, policymakers, academics, development practitioners. So all of them are going to be involved not only through the medium of this conference, but otherwise by engagement continuously over the network, over other closed-door events that we hold over Google Hangouts, as Shweta has mentioned. While we were quick to emerge from the financial and economic crisis that affected all of us, including India, the recovery and growth have not equated to social development for all, and that continues to be a big challenge for for us. With realization that more and better jobs need to be created and the need to lower unemployment and improve well-being, the new government, as you know, is embarking on a mega job creation journey with special focus on skill development and labor-intensive manufacturing. Slowdown in India has been propelled by poor performance in especially the manufacturing sector, and along with it, low levels of investment. If you recall the heydays or the golden period of India's growth, it was triggered by huge increases, especially in private investment. So investment and manufacturing are going to be key. And both these dimensions are major barriers not only for India, but all South Asian economies in their pursuit of higher and more sustainable rates of growth, growth that leads to more job creation in the formal economy. Between 1999, 2000 and 2012, the increase in manufacturing employment was 15.7 million or thereabouts, an increase of about 1.3 million per year. The organized manufacturing sector created only 7.5 million jobs of this increase in manufacturing. This amounts to an increase of approximately 6.3 lakhs or 0.63 million per annum. Clearly, this rate of job creation falls severely short of the requirements of productive jobs, or the 10 million youth expected to enter the job market every year in the next 10 years. Clearly, a major challenge that confronts India. Creating a large number of jobs in the manufacturing sector in the face of intensifying demographic pressures is inadequate. These jobs need to be productive. India's manufacturing sector is characterized by, as you know, the dualistic nature. That is the prevalence of a formal organized sector and the coexistence of a large informal and unorganized sector. The unorganized sector is in particular, the household sector accounts for a disproportionately large share of employment, 90% of total manufacturing employment, but a very small share in value added. Firms in the organized sector, as you know, pay higher wages, are more productive, provide for better working conditions, security of tenure, non-wage benefits, and social security that firms compared in the informal sector. It is this sector which has the necessary characteristics to create productive employment, and we need to focus on expanding the formal and manufacturing sectors. Labor markets in India, however, continue to be dominated by informal and agricultural employment, where jobs are generally poor and unprotected. Informality persists. Although the share of workers in the informal sector, this is data from NSSO, has fallen from 86.3% to 82.2% over the period 2004 to 2012, the proportion of informal workers in the formal sector has increased. And there are lots of research studies to suggest why this is the case. In other words, new jobs are being created in larger registered firms. However, these jobs are often without regular employment relationships and benefits as a result of the increasing use of contracted and casual labor. The quality of employment and opportunities for better jobs continue to be unequally distributed also between men and women. When women work, they tend to earn less, they work in less productive jobs, and are overrepresented in unpaid family work. In India, 21.2% of working men have a regular salaried job, while only 13.5% of women have such employment. Again, this is from the NSSO 2013. If we look at the worldwide employment trends, we realize that employment is not expanding sufficiently to keep up with the growing labor force. According to ILO report on Global Employment Trends 2014, there were almost 200 million people unemployed around the world, an increase of almost 5 million compared to the year before. And if current trends continue, there will be 215 million job seekers by 2018. Clearly, unemployment is on the rise, especially in Europe. As you all know, youth unemployment is especially a grave concern. The bulk of the increase in global unemployment is, however, the largest proportion is, however, in East and South Asia, which together represent more than 45% of the additional job seekers, followed by Sub-Saharan Africa and then Europe. And according to the most recent OECD economic projections from 2014, unemployment in the OECD will decline but will remain well above the pre-crisis levels of this year and throughout 2015. So, what do we need to do? In the long term, the success of countries in creating more and better jobs will be largely determined by providing people with the skills they need and by ensuring they can adapt and improve those skills to face the challenges of a rapidly evolving labor market. Programs facilitating labor mobility and providing training and work experience are essential to allow countries with persistently large labor market slack to foster job creation. Even though public finances are squeezed in many countries, it is essential to provide funding for such programs to ensure that recovery becomes a jobs recovery and not what in India we've been calling over the last few years jobless growth. And this could also help reduce income inequality and poverty. Despite the importance of education for the prospects of young people in the labor market, in most countries the quality of career guidance and of labor market data that support it are patchy at best. We're going to discuss some of these issues in the conference as well. While the emphasis in many countries has been on broadening and improving work-based learning by expanding and improving apprenticeships and vocational education and training programs, many students who work do so outside the formalized settings. This calls for a better understanding of the type of jobs that improve students' chances to find work after leaving education in order to design appropriate policy measures. Crucial questions that need to be addressed include whether jobs need to be related to the student's field of specialization, what channels need to be strengthened to ensure that more students get some labor market exposure before graduation, what is the optimal balance between study and work time? As concerns exist in some countries that students may work too much, and how does one ensure that returns to skills reflect true productivity? We're going to discuss some of these questions, and as I said in the beginning, and as Shweta had also pointed out in the description of our conference, we are going to discuss not only questions around this, but also around youth unemployment, green jobs and skills, labor migration and development, job discrimination, social protection, and labor welfare. Our researchers who are sitting in the audience will be taking copious notes of the presentations and discussions that are held over the course of the next 2 days. And at the end of this conference, we shall produce a summary of the discussions for wider dissemination and discourse. Once again, I express deep gratitude to all of you who have, especially our guests from abroad, and I wish you all a productive conference. May I request now Dr. Ishara Ahluwalia, ICRIER chairperson, to please give her welcome remarks. Thank you.
Ms. Gauri Kumar, Secretary Labour, Government of India, Dr. Martin Rama, Dr. Manish Sabharwal, Dr. Rajat Kathuria, and friends, it's indeed a great honor for me to come and welcome you all to this conference, because this conference is different from the normal conferences that we have. It is a conference which brings together a whole lot of researchers who are working and will continue to work. I understand this is work in progress. We have much more planned and scheduled for the years ahead. And this conference brings them together to deliberate on issues that are of prime importance, not only for India, but for many other countries. You know, very often in India, we talk of demographic dividend. The truth is, yes, that unlike many countries which are grappling with aging populations and rising dependency ratios, India is in a sweet spot for its demographic transition. Over 60% of India's population is in the working age of 15 to 59 years. As Dr. Kathuria pointed out, we will be adding about 10 million people seeking jobs every year over the next 3 years. And this amounts to a quarter of the projected increase in global working age population between 2010 and 2040. A large workforce, however, translates into more workers only if there are jobs for it. Again, as Dr. Kathuria pointed out, over 90% of all workers are engaged in the informal sector. And these large masses of workers have to be transferred from less than full-time engagement in low productivity activities to full-time employment in high productivity jobs by expanding the formal sector. So, creating productive employment and not just more jobs is critical to the process of fostering inclusive economic development for India. This conference ventures to provide key insights on how to address this challenge. Again, as was pointed out, two idiosyncratic features of India's structural transformation are: one, the disconnect between GDP growth and employment growth, and two, India's shift straight from agriculture to services-led growth, leapfrogging manufacturing. India has faltered in raising the share of employment in the non-agricultural sector, even while sustaining high growth rates in its gross domestic product. Even more important, the sectoral composition of India's growth has been such that it has generated relatively fewer opportunities of productive employment for India's poor. The manufacturing sector, which has greater capability of generating more jobs per unit of output than services, has the largest potential for broad-based employment, given India's comparative advantage in unskilled, semi-skilled labor. However, so far, manufacturing has not been the engine of growth or employment generation for the Indian economy. The manufacturing sector needs to grow at a much faster rate to have a higher multiplier effect on the national economy, and employment elasticity of the manufacturing sector also has to increase. All of you, over the years, through research outputs and seminars, have seen a recounting of all the multiple factors that have contributed to the slow growth of manufacturing. I mean, I refer to the inadequate and poor quality infrastructure, regulatory bottlenecks, rigidities in labor market, inadequate finance. To this, we have added in recent years two more factors: challenges of land acquisition and dilatory procedures for environmental clearances. We need to address these challenges to ensure that India's manufacturing sector can absorb more workers in the coming decade. The Prime Minister's call for Make in India is very timely. This Make in India campaign has to be accomplished through expanding productive employment in manufacturing. The deliberations in this conference should show how this can be done. Another area of Indian economy which is receiving much greater attention today than it has in the past is the need for planned urbanization. Planned urbanization, industrialization, and economic development are expected to go hand in hand as employment shifts out of agriculture and industrial production is located in and around cities with their agglomeration economies. Urbanization in India seems to have been driven primarily by natural increase and poverty-driven migration from rural areas. To the extent that there has been migration in expectation of better jobs, the policymakers have failed them. What we need really is to develop our cities as engines of growth. For this, we need better infrastructure, better delivery of services, better social infrastructure, better law and order. And I must say in this context, I was just talking to Ms. Gauri Kumar and saying to her that I had met her several years ago when she was running the city of Surat, and she had coined the slogan for Surat, which was a city that cares, and then went about implementing that in every possible manner, from sending SMSs to new parents to get inoculations for their kids, to organizing special parks for elderly people where free newspapers were provided and parks were kept pebble-free so they could walk, and everything that went in between to make the city caring and at the same time creating the economies of agglomeration which will improve the investment climate. So Gauri, I'm delighted that having worked on those ends, you've now come to work on the third most important aspect of urbanization and industrialization, that is labor and employment. Because if we don't provide productive employment, if we don't provide skills to match where there is demand for skills, we will have not only unemployment in our cities and poverty which goes with it, but also law and order and problems of safety. So we are very fortunate in having you in this critical position who understands the several dimensions along which we have to work in order to really create productive jobs as we aspire for inclusive, sustainable, and faster growth. I must also say that the resilience strategy for climate change, again, Surat is one of the cities which has really led this process. So you also understand sustainability. And I think Gauri really deserves a big hand for this. And we researchers know that we can only do so much in terms of, applying our minds to do methodological sort of, clarification of issues and ideas. We need the support of government first to get information. We need people in government who understand that there is a bridge from research to policy. And then we need implementers who can actually translate all this into the real world in which we show the difference that we can make. So we are really very fortunate that you are in this seat and that you are here. You obviously, I was told by Dr. Kathuria that when he did not know all this. I told him this morning that, I knew your background, and he said he was very happy that when they invited you for this conference, you did not seek too many details on what was going on and readily agreed to come and give your time. So I told him I'm not surprised, because I think you should, all of you researchers, should expect a great deal of cooperation in working towards jobs for development with people like Ms. Gauri Kumar in that seat. So with those words, let me welcome you all to this conference, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, Raja.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahluwalia, for putting in the context for the day forward and the second day of the conference. I next would like to invite Dr. Martin Rama, Chief Economist, the World Bank. Also, I would like to share that he was also the director of the World Development Report 2013 on jobs. So we all look forward to really listening to Dr. Rama. So Dr. Martin Rama, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Good morning, Dr. Gauri Kumar, Dr. Ishar Ahluwalia, Manish Sabharwal, Rajat Kathuria. I have to start with a big word of thanks because this conference has promoted me to the title of Chief Economist of the World Bank, which I wasn't aware I had. To my knowledge, it was Kaushik Basu, our Chief Economist, but I feel very honored that South Asia has been, which is the region I cover, has received that attention. More seriously, I'm really grateful to have this opportunity to be with you. As was said by the presenter, I had the honor to lead the World Development Report 2013 on jobs, and I see this agenda of this seminar really as a natural continuation of that type of work. By the way, I'm very pleased. I was telling Rajat that the picture you chose for this event is a picture from that report, a picture by the celebrated Brazilian photographer Sebastião Salgado that we used for the report. Now, in that report, to me it was an interesting thing. I had been working before that report quite often on jobs from a labor economics point of view, from a relatively narrow labor economics point of view. And as we worked with a great team on this report over an intense year, we ran consultations, 24 countries, different case studies, including one very important effort in Bangladesh in this region. What came to us as really almost a revelation is that trying to put jobs in the corner of labor economics is not doing justice to the importance. Jobs are not just one commodity in a market. They are relevant in other ways. So the first motto you see there, jobs are what we earn. That's relatively straightforward. They are what we do, but they are also to some extent who we are. They shape our interactions in society. That realization of this multidimensional nature of jobs and this importance of jobs came very strongly. And it also came methodologically, because what we realize is that most of the things we care about in development actually happen through jobs. If you think of poverty reduction, most of the poor in the world work. They get out of poverty through their work. So jobs take people out of poverty. If you think about gender equality, one of the biggest sources of empowerment, of agency for women is to earn money and to bring money. That changes allocations at the household level, even changes decision making at the social level. Conflict, we care about conflict, and conflict is very much related to jobs, especially for young men. And so we started looking at different angles of development, and we came to the conclusion that a lot of problems, even conceptual bodies that are out of labor economics that we use, like urban economics, for instance, can be reinterpreted in relation to jobs. If you think urban economics is how people getting together in one place become more productive, the kind of spillovers, the learning, the thicker markets, in a way is to say jobs in cities do something for other jobs in ways that they do not do in rural areas. Same thing with international trade, same thing with several bodies of literature. So we saw an entire agenda that almost places labor, jobs not in labor economics, but in public economics, and tries to see what are the untapped payoffs of jobs where policy interventions are needed really to bring them about. And I want to use that justice framework to bring about a couple of ideas of work that we have going on for India on what are the implications for jobs in the case of India. The first point I want to make comes from a report that we just released in Washington and we will be releasing in India in January, I believe, which is called Addressing Inequality in South Asia. One of the things we did for this report was to look not just as education, health, opportunity in childhood, which is where you start your journey through life, but also at what happens with mobility after that. And as much as the news on opportunity are not so good in South Asia, there's still some way to go in human development indicators, in equality of opportunity. the news about mobility are remarkably good. We could conduct with new technique analysis of mobility in India and Bangladesh. And what we found is that mobility is increasing steadily, and it's associated with jobs. Even with jobs that are informal, they play a very important role. We found that mobility is higher in urban areas than in rural areas. We found that jobs of farm employment basically takes people out of poverty, but wage employment takes people into the middle class. And we found that regular wage employment is really where you have the highest mobility. So first thing, as I said, of jobs mattering beyond just earnings, the entire dynamics where you start in a society where there are many factors that could play in the direction of stronger inequality, there is one offsetting factor, that's jobs. And remarkably, even for disadvantaged groups, scheduled castes, for Muslims, we find that jobs trump all that. The only thing that really brings equality is jobs. So that's the first message I want to give as a preview. We will be releasing this report soon. Now, as was said by Dr. Ahluwalia, one of the challenges of this region is the phenomenal demographic transition. And that challenge can become an opportunity if people find jobs. But it's not just a problem of unemployment, of people not finding jobs and remaining idle. It will be a problem if half of the population, women, are not part of it. If you think of where the big missed opportunity of the demographic transition could be, I would say it's on the gender side. And I want to report on work we are doing again with colleagues Rinku Murugai or Urmila Chatterjee at the World Bank, trying to look again at what is happening with female labor force participation. Why is that female labor force participation rates in rural areas are going down in India? And the common explanation is there is an income effect. As there is more money, gradually for a variety of reasons, in rural areas there is more money, in a relatively patriarchal society, households withdraw the spouses, the wives from the labor market. And there is truth to that, but one thing we did again with a new methodological approach was to look at the job opportunities where people live. And is what I'm trying to show there, which is by location, what kind of employment there is. And you see one line going down, which is farmers, and basically collapsing around 5,000, population of 5,000. But you see the green line, which is wage employment, non-farm regular employment, only going up in relatively big places. And one explanation, and the data seems to support this explanation, is what is happening in India is as it becomes urbanized, there is this U in the middle, where there are jobs that are suitable, considered socially suitable for men, but which are not the kind of jobs that women will take. Farm is almost like working at home. Regular employment is safe. In the middle is not so safe. So when we control for these, the trend towards decreasing female labor participation rate basically disappears. It's a story of jobs. So getting job opportunities, and especially getting wage employment, again, it will not be good just for mobility. It will be good for female labor force participation. So the point that I was making is where farm jobs disappear and where jobs in factories and offices pick up. Now the question, and we were discussing with Manish this before, is so what is getting on the way? Why is that there are more of those regular wage jobs, formal or informal, but regular wage jobs, so you have an employer and you have a paycheck in India? And I want to explore two explanations. One is, of course, labor regulation. This is a table, again, for a paper we did with Urmila Chatterjee, just looking at how many different thresholds are in place with different pieces of regulation if you want to play by the rule as an employer. There is an enormous complexity, and this has been pointed out by several before us. But what is interesting is that this doesn't mean that a country should completely deregulate, or the debate tends to be overly simplified versus in terms of protection versus flexibility. And what we did is to benchmark all the benefits and all the characteristics of the Indian regulatory system against the BRICS. So you have the BRICS is the green line, and again in blue other countries that are relevant comparators in Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand. And we did for maternity leave, annual leave, minimum wage relative to the average wage, trade union density, social security cost, and protection against dismissal. And you see the dark brown line is India. The more you go outside, the more you move to the hexagon, the more demanding the regulations. And you see that India is not an outlier in things like maternity leave. It's not an outlier on minimum wages or on annual leave. It's clearly an outlier on the dismissal, for layoffs for economic reasons, especially where it becomes a complicated political process. So if one had to make one recommendation, simplifying all this may take a long time, but just allowing new hires to be under a more flexible regime, provided that it's formal, that all the rest is maintained. A bit what Rajasthan has done, but pushing it, like any new hire could be under a new regime, could make a difference. So first point is we believe that there is an area for work here, and we are very pleased to see the new government paying attention to that. At the same time, when we do this analysis, we come to the conclusion that this will not be a magic wand. The amount of formalization that will happen because of this will be perhaps substantial, but still relatively minor. And that's why I want to point to the second point, and again I was delighted to that Dr. Ahluwalia mentioned that, which is cities. One could say, well, firms create jobs, the private sector creates jobs, and that's true. But what lies behind, underneath the dynamics of firms is cities. Functional cities have vibrant firms, have gazelles, have a lot of job creation. And here is a map of India with the share of wage employment by district, depending on, by district, despite the fact that all these districts are subject to the same set of regulations. So all of these are regulations that apply across the board, across all India. There are nuances in interpretation, and you see that the share of wage employment is not uniformly distributed. There are places that do much better at generating wage employment. And there may be something to be learned out of it. This is from a work project that, again, we're hoping to be releasing this sometime next year, which is to collect in one simple platform all the spatial database, all the database we have, satellite imagery, census, surveys, administrative data, so that we can understand more the granularity of good performance. And so we used this data to analyze, so what is behind the good performance in terms of wage employment. And what was interesting is that what came strongly, and again it echoes exactly the point that Dr. Ahluwalia was saying and the example of Surat, is that is the governance of cities that is really determinant. Here what we did is to take the unit of observation is the share of wage employment in a district, and we relate that to the characteristics of the main urban center in the district. And by characteristics it can be the size, and you see the different sizes on the right, or it can be the governance. One of the striking things for an outsider about India is a relatively weak governance of cities. In other countries, cities have mayors, and mayors is a very powerful figure. When you interpret the experience of China or Vietnam, where I had the privilege of working and living for many years, competition between cities was really the main driver of business development. Cities wanted to attract business because that was their tax base, that was their employment, and they were making things easier for business to participate. That's much more difficult in India. And so what we put there is the notified areas, the municipalities, municipal corporations, but there are two, perhaps the most salient in some of the analysis, which are state capitals. State capitals, by the chance of being a state capital, have a government, have a powerful government, and industrial townships, where industrial townships get organized in a way that resembles East Asia. And what you see is the effect is substantially higher wage employment in the areas that have stronger urban governance for the same size. So it's not just size. So let me finish here. Just these are insights from research that is ongoing and we will be disseminating gradually. Again, an enormous centrality of jobs. We are very pleased that we are having this event, and we are very pleased to see this agenda so central. An importance of jobs that goes beyond just the earnings. I gave the example of mobility. I gave the example of female labor force participation, and possibly two agendas. One related to regulation, which is not to say get rid of protection. It says get rid of the things that make you so different from other BRICS and other competitors, and especially the urbanization agenda. And again, we're delighted about the 100 cities, 500 cities, because that may be where the success in job creation will be for India. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rama, for a wonderful presentation. I'm sure we have lots of questions, so we'd be looking forward to the questions in the eventual time here. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Manish Sabharwal, who would be talking on employment and entrepreneurship for development. He's the co-founder and chairman, Team Lease Services from Bangalore. So, Mr. Sabharwal.
One of the biggest challenges for me to when I tell my wife I'm coming for another conference or writing another article on jobs, she says, I hope you'll say something new. And my standard answer to her is an old story about Einstein, where he gives an exam to his students, and 5 minutes into the exam, one of the students stands up and said, Professor Einstein, the questions in the exam are the same as last year's exam. So he says, well, the answers are different this year. But I will submit that that story doesn't apply to jobs. The questions have been the same and the answers have actually been the same. And unfortunately, we haven't moved beyond the what to the how. You could change the date on the Kothari Committee report of 1968 and not be very wrong in higher education. Apprenticeship Act reform was the 20th point in Indira Gandhi's 20-point program in 1975. We just did that a few weeks ago. So I will submit there's a difference between the list of ingredients in a recipe. And the list of ingredients is absolutely uninteresting. I think everybody knows what the list of ingredients are. The recipe is about proportioning, it's about sequencing, it's about the political economy. You know, policy is a child of politics, politics is a contact sport. All that is sort of what is probably more interesting for the next few years rather than the stuff that's happened in the last 10 years. I personally work for a people supply chain company. We've hired somebody every 5 minutes for the last 5 years, but we've only hired 5% of the kids who came to us for a job. So I'm sort of at the agony and ecstasy of India's labor market, if you think about it. I had the ecstasies. I had a telecom client shouting at me saying, I have 200 open sales positions for the last week, for the last month, why haven't you filled them up? I said, well, I'm doing it for all your competitors, your hiring standards are too high. So he called me back later in the day and said, I need a pair of hands, I don't care if a brain comes attached. We are a child of low hiring standards. The kids getting jobs with us today would not have got jobs 2 years ago. The kids getting a job 5 years ago would not have got a job with us 10 years ago. So that's corporate India is lowering hiring standards. I know there's a productivity implication in many economists' minds, but from public policy perspective, it's a great thing. The kids getting jobs today would not have got. But the agony wasn't as obvious to me. We had a job fair in Jaipur, 35,000 people showed up. I met 800 of them. I can guarantee if they were born in Delhi, Bombay, or Bangalore, they would have had a job. Unfortunately, they were born in Dausa or Barmer or Junjunu or somewhere in rural Rajasthan. So the two most important decisions a child in India makes are to choose your parents wisely and to choose your PIN code wisely. I obviously did that. Everybody in this room did that. I did not realize that. 60, 70,000 kids come to me for a job every month. I hire about 5,000 of them. The other guys don't have a birth defect. They went to college. They did what their parents told them to. So if you step back from the specifics of the issues of employment and jobs and employability and education, and I make the case that the 3 E's are much more closely related than we traditionally have thought about. But the most interesting question, this is a conference on development, the most interesting question of all times is why our country is poor, right? I went for my MBA to the US in August 94. And by September 94, I was asking myself, these Americans aren't smarter than us, why are they richer than us? Clearly, at an individual level, they're not. But the system has capabilities which allows the individuals to be more productive. Finally, poverty is about productivity. And I would submit that the infrastructure of opportunity is about the 3 E's of education, employment, and employability. But we all have many disagreements in 3 E's, but the scale of the problem and the size of solution in the last 5-10 years has been on a different planet, if not a different gamma quadrant. The scale is much larger. Everybody agrees with it. In fact, I'm tired of people agreeing with me, and actually nothing happening after that. So I would submit that the transmission losses between talk and walk are because of 5 problems. There are 3 specific problems, but there are 5 geographies of work. There's a physical geography of work, there's an enterprise geography of work, there's a sectoral geography of work, there's an education geography of work, and there's a legislative geography of work, and I'll just quickly run through them before ending. The physical geography of work is exactly what Martin talked about. Do you take jobs to people or people to jobs? It's the most interesting question because we built our company based on taking people from rural areas to urban areas, but that's becoming impossible in the last 2 years because of a divergence between nominal wages and real wages in big cities. So I had a kid in a job fair in Gwalior a few weeks ago say, give me 4,000 rupees in Gwalior, 7,000 rupees in Gurgaon, 9,000 rupees in Delhi, and 18,000 rupees in Bombay. My bags are packed, tell me where you want me to go. I said, why do you need 4 times more money in Bombay than in Gwalior? He said, all the kids who went for 10,000 rupees have come back, khana, rehna, or office jana. Eating, living, and commuting just doesn't work anymore. So the question of CEOs of cities, as Martin said, we don't have mayors. You know, the only real mayor in India is the Chief Minister of Delhi, if you think about it. But in 1924, Jawaharlal Nehru was the mayor of Allahabad, and Vallabhbhai Patel was the mayor of Ahmedabad. Chittaranjan Das was the mayor of Calcutta, and Rajendra Prasad was the mayor of Patna. And there are wonderful letters talking about street lights, talking about sanitation, which I have, and which are exactly the issues which matter for job creation. So the governance of cities is probably the most important question which we need to answer. The enterprise geography of work. We have 63 million enterprises in India. 12 million of those enterprises don't have a permanent operating address. We only have 900,000 companies, only 500,000 companies have revenue. Only 45,000 companies yesterday posted a job on any job board in India, Naukri, Monster, or whatever else. There are only 10,000 members of CIA. But most tragically, there are only 7,500 companies in India with a paid-up capital of more than $2 million. So 63 million enterprises may be huge, but it's only 7,500 companies with a paid-up capital of $2 million, which is not a lot of money. And most tragically, most of these companies are small, right? As an entrepreneur, there are 2 kinds of companies you can create, a baby and a dwarf. Both are small, the baby is going to grow, the dwarf is going to stay there. Most of most of enterprises in India are dwarfs. The sectoral one, you've already covered. 12% manufacturing employment is wrong. Whether we're going to get to China's 40, 45, probably not, but 12 is just the wrong number. And I'd like to talk on this issue of self-employment because 50% of India is self-employed. I'm really tired of solutions positioning more self-employment because most people who are self-employed aren't, the poor aren't unemployed because, aren't self-employed because they want to be, or there is an overweighted entrepreneurial gene among Indians. They just can't afford to be unemployed. That brings us to the related point of the education geography of work. 226 million people take the class 10th exam every year, 110 million fail. 16 million people take the class 12th exam every year, 8 million fail. 8 million who pass, 5 million go to college, 3 million disappear. So there is a massive gap between that system. Our gross enrollment ratio is 19%. There's a mismatch between what we're teaching our kids. An automobile engineer is still required to be taught with a carburetor. No Indian car is made with a carburetor. I can give you thousands of examples where what we're teaching the kids are not what we want. And finally is the legislative geography of work, which is the labor law issue. And I think that's important, and that's finally started to be tackled. But 100% of net job creation in the last 20 years has happened in informal jobs. Net job creation, because we're stuck at the same 90%. And I think that does matter. They influence firm-level behavior. Is there sequencing? Is Chapter 5B the hire and fire the most important thing in labor laws? Probably not. I think probably the 45% salary confiscation for low-wage employees, probably thinking about definitions, probably thinking about inspections, all the work which has already begun. But I think we need to agree that 90% informal employment is, I know Martin has an urbanization explanation for that, and I absolutely agree. But 25 years into reform, we have to accept the fact that 100% of net job creation, there's not some genetic proclivity of Indians to informal employment, so we have to start unpacking the causes. So I think the solutions are obvious to all of us, but the 3 E's are much more closely related of education, employment, and employability, and the government is organized vertically, but this problem is a horizontal. And I can give you many examples of the traffic jams either at the intersection of the state and the center, or between Ministry of Labor and between Ministry of HRD, or between 19 other ministries and 2 of them, where we're sort of, you're thinking vertically and this problem is a horizontal, and that's killing the scale of the problem. I think we have to accept that cost, quality, and scale are the impossible trinity for India. You can get 1 out of T, 2 out of 3, It's hard to get 3 out of 3 in the same institution. And we will have to be careful with answering. You know, John Gardner was an education secretary in the US in the 1960s. He wrote a wonderful book called Can We Be Equal and Excellent? I think it's a profound question for India because we do want to be equal. We are a democracy, which is why we expanded the number of engineering seats from 200,000 to 1.5 million in the last 10 years. 30% of engineering seats are empty, 30% of engineering colleges may close down, but that's a much better outcome for India than the 30,000 doctors a year we have. So we want to be equal, we will expand, but can we be excellent, and how do we strike that balance between the two is an important question. So there are 3 problems in our labor market. There's a matching problem, which is connecting demand to supply. There's a mismatch problem, which is repairing supply for demand. And there's a pipeline problem, which is preparing supply for demand. And I distinction repair and prepare based on the opening balance of the child or the duration of the course. But then the solutions are well known. We have to convert our employment exchanges to career centers. We have to get rid of the labor laws which raise the costs of formality, and we have to increase the costs of informality. We have to fix our apprenticeships, we have to do performance management for our ITIs, we have to fix the governance of ITIs, we have to reduce the gap between our education system and our employers, we have to convert our Right to Education Act into a Right to Learning Act because the RTE currently confuses school buildings with building schools. I can go on. I think all of us know the agenda. The point is that I think the agenda is well known. What we need is a more adventurous state. An adventurous state doesn't mean just a more adventurous bureaucracy, because there are 3 deficits around here. The private sector has a trust deficit, some of it earned. The government has an execution deficit, some of it earned. And the non-profit sector has a scale deficit, most of it earned, in my mind. So the 3 but the solution lies in all 3 of us working together. I think people who believe that either the private sector or the government or not-profits can solve the 3 problem haven't been paying attention to the willingness of people to do stuff, but the actual reality on ground. And this is not a problem like cancer or climate change. This is a pure execution issue. Mario Cuomo was the governor of New York. He used to say, we politicians campaign in poetry, but we govern in prose. I would submit that the transmission losses between poetry and prose are not about more cooks in the kitchen. They are about a different recipe. They're about people working together. They're about new life forms. There's about space for innovation. But most importantly, it's going to require a lot of boldness in a more adventurous state. And I'm not saying the state has to do all the adventure, it's just to create the space for more adventure so that people who are sort of coming with number of statistically independent, genetically diverse ideas in India today get the space to do that. In 1994, when I landed in the US, there was a front page article on the Wall Street Journal which said that India is more interesting than important. I hope that journalist is eating the newspaper on which he wrote that, because what's happening in India is not once in a decade or once in a millennium. It's really once in the lifetime of a country. And I think we're clearly on track now to have had 10, 20 years of a therapy session about what and moving to the how. And I think we're starting to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sabharwal, for a very crisp and nice talk. And now next, as the research by Mr. Rama says, cities with strong governance have more wage employment. Madam Gauri Kumar, Secretary, Union Minister of Labor and Employment, has probably done the walking on that research already proved. So next, I invite Ms. Gauri Kumar, Secretary, Union Minister of Labor and Employment, Government of India, to please give the thematic address here. Thank you.
Thank you. When I got that letter from Dr. Rajat Kathuria, and the reason why I readily accepted was because I felt that, we have for long been looking at labor issues with a labor prism or a labor lens. And I always feel that, it needs to be much more intersectoral. It should be much more diverse way of looking at it, and that's the reason why I did that. And I should know I wasn't at Surat, but I was Principal Secretary Urban Development, so Surat was part of my team. And, I think I also spent a long time in industry. I was Secretary Industries. I've spent time in finance. I spent a year, I could have been a researcher. I spent a year at Harvard. So I am into research. And the reason why I mentioned this is for the same issue which I think Manish mentioned, that you know, we need to create space. It's a very diverse country. One model doesn't work. You need to have thousands of models and thousands of people working in different areas. And each one with a different concern. The urban, I was also an urban development secretary, I was in industry. I think we need to have each of these sectors contributing to the economy, to the growth, to development, to diversity, to inclusiveness, to skill building, to jobs, and then only we'll be. So I think the country really needs solutions, which is not a single solution, which needs multiplicity of solution in multiplicity directions. And you know, we keep talking about our demography and what a wonderful advantage it is. And I would like to mention two more facets which somehow perhaps get missed. That we have one of the lowest dependency ratios in this country. So we can afford people to be doing skilling for much longer. And one of the lowest dependency ratios in the world is going to remain like this, I believe, by till 2030 or so. Another thing, you know, that which you know, besides the declining labor force participation rate for women, which was pointed out, is also the fact that only about 10% of our total workforce has technical skills of some type. Only 2.5% have a formal certification. And out of 2.5%, only 50% have a shop floor, which is, you know, a technical certificate. That's like an ITI or a diploma type of thing. Now, I mentioned this in the context of the Make in India campaign, and I personally believe that for us to be globally competitive, you have to be really outstanding on the shop floor. You need to have workmanship, you need to have quality assurance. And unless we really played it out, you know, ITI and IIT people, a lot of people mix up between the two. And I say this because ITI is the industrial training institution. They were supposed to run in shifts on the same lines as industry does. And the whole idea was that there would be very close synergy between the two. Over a period of time, somehow, you know, ITIs lost out and we started producing engineers, notwithstanding the fact that the employability of ITI pass outs is about above 60%, and of engineers, I think just below 25. Despite that, we keep having this social, greater social acceptance of an engineer and less of ITIs. I would just mention a few of the things, a few initiatives which we have started. It's not at all to say, as I said, that thousands of people, thousands of sectors, thousands of ministries need to work on thousands of initiatives at any point of time. And I'll just mention a couple of those which we have started. And we are really looking for partners across borders, more or less. You know, we are looking at partnering in Australia, partnering Germany, and we are looking at partnering all of you who are present here, researchers, private sector, and the NGOs. Some of the things that we are doing to re-establish the brand equity and the quality of ITIs is that you know, we introduced a semester system because till now we had, if it was a 2-year program, you would have an exam only at the 2 years, so which ensured that there was no regular teaching. So we introduced semester system from February this year. We revamped our entire, we understood that you, in a very dynamic Indian business situation, you can't remain wedded to very old systems. So we have created an institutional mechanism whereby our curricula would be regularly reviewed, and we comprehensively restructured all our programs. We dumped the courses which were irrelevant, we introduced new courses. We looked at our curriculum, we revamped the whole curriculum and introduced a new curriculum with effect from August this year. Now, it's easier said than done. It's easy to introduce a new curriculum. It's very difficult to ensure that it is imparted with the same passion with which it has been written. And we did this with mentor councils, which were headed by industry. We had a lot of academia, we had research, we had IITs actually, a lot of IITs contributing in this. We created mentor councils which will be in, you know, over a long period, working over a long period. What we did really to ensure that this curricula is imparted is we gave leadership training to the principals of government ITIs, so all the principals. And I mean, the results that we got were really breathtaking. It's not that that people don't want to do things. I think we have to enable and empower people to do things, and we did this. We also started a lot of training programs through distance education for all the faculty of ITIs in each subject. We are trying to establish mobility is a question which Martin raised. Mobility, I think, it has to be, we have to have mobility, and that's something where I think over a period of time it has got fixed in our thinking process. These silos have become verticals, you know, and we need to cut through the silos, these mazes of silos. And whether it's a caste system, I think that's what is really the optimism that's coming in. How do you create mobility from ITI to supervisory positions and to higher education?